Let's move on. Daniel Harris is with us this morning to gloat, no doubt, about the fact that he's been right about Liverpool all along, Daniel.
Well, I'm not sure. It remains to be seen. But the thing is Liverpool had a phenomenal amount of points in the first half of the season. Not just for them, but for any team. And they just at no point struck me like a team that were that good, that was so good that they were going to win almost every game. And so it's funny because over the course of the last few seasons, teams have sort of been winning the league without actually having a bad patch. Manchester City pretty much did it. Chelsea didn't really start. They lost a few points at the beginning and then barely not again until the league was secure. And Leicester never quite had a bad run either. But it does look like Liverpool is starting to hit that blip. They've got a few injuries, a few difficult games. And in the end, I think they're not that good.
Yeah. Why not? What's the issue?
So I think the issue yesterday and the issue also against Leicester in midweek was that if you stop that front three, there's not a lot else. Because the midfield players are decent players. So at full strength, when they've got Henderson, Milner, Wijnaldum, they can run you off the pitch, but they're not going to play you off the pitch. They're not going to pass you off the pitch. Yesterday, obviously, Henderson, Wijnaldum were injured and Milner played at fullback. So what they had was Fabinho, who is probably a better player than we've seen, and the same served Keita actually. But again, they're not players they're players whose X factor is not one that is going to move the ball quickly and dissect a well-organised defence. I actually thought Keita played better than I've seen him in a lot of games yesterday. But if you look at the options that City have to move defences around and to create space for their front players, and if you just think about how many match winners City have, there's no comparison really. If you think about elite level players, who are Liverpool's elite level players? Virgil van Dijk and Mohamed Salah, and that's it. If you look at who City's elite players are, you're making a list, you're running out of fingers. And those are the kind of players that when things don't go according to plan, you can rely on either a style of play that gets you there in the end, or an individual who gets you there in the end. And Liverpool don't really have enough of either of those two things, I don't think.
Do you not think that for the role he provides to the squad, that Firmino is an elite level player, and the same for Alisson and Sadio Mane, even at least two out of those three are surely elite as well, no?
Alisson, I guess I would have to see more of. I'm not saying he's not an excellent goalkeeper, but I haven't seen him have that many brilliant games for Liverpool, make that many brilliant saves for Liverpool, where I think most goalkeepers wouldn't have stopped that. When you think about who the best goalkeepers are in the world so far, I don't see that Alisson is that close to David de Gea. He might be, and maybe David de Gea just has more to do, but I haven't seen it yet from Alisson, but perhaps he is. And as for Firmino and Mane, I think they're good players in this formation. They work, but if you're asking me, do I think that I'm saying Sergio Aguero is an elite level player, I don't think Roberto Firmino is in the same fortnight as Sergio Aguero. And Sadio Mane, again, is a good player, but he's not in the league of even Mohamed Salah, never mind some of the players that other teams have. So I'm not saying that these players aren't excellent players. They're not high-level players. But when you're thinking about players who are going to regularly make the difference for you when you're chasing a title, it remains to be seen, at the very best, whether those guys are good enough.
I do wonder as well, like if we take that point and move it on a little bit further, if the idea of the chaos that surrounds Liverpool sometimes is really the best way to approach things. Because I guess if you have a squad full of elite players, if you have a squad where 1 to 11 is a top-class, world-class talent, then you can get away with a bit of chaos. You can get away with things being off the cuff a little bit more. I do wonder, does Jurgen Klopp need a little bit more control in terms of their attacking play?
Well, I think he tried to sign Nabil Fekir in the summer, and Fekir was an acknowledgement that the midfield is a bit prosaic. But had they signed Fekir, he's in his way more of the same. He would have given them that vision that they got Shaqiri for instead, and Shaqiri has obviously helped. But what Fekir wouldn't give you, and what Fekir on his own wouldn't give you, is that method that you're talking about, that ability to keep passing the ball, because that requires more than one player. That requires at least two or maybe three midfield players that will keep the ball moving. And the way that Liverpool played this season has actually been quite a lot less chaotic than last season. We've seen them rely on the defence a lot more, rather than them just run opponents off the field and score a lot of goals and concede a lot of goals. So they have been a little bit different this season, but it's beginning to look like, as things are getting a bit tense, they're going back to what they know. And that's a bit of what we saw yesterday, where they're just trying to play the ball a bit quicker. They're rushing, and that's not always going to work when you play teams that have decent players. And West Ham have decent players. Leicester have decent players, and they happen to bump into them on a day when their decent players played well and their plan worked. And that's those games when you're going for a title where you've got to find a way to win. And Liverpool don't have any form in doing that, and they don't quite have the quantity of individual talent that will find a way for you if the method isn't there.
We've been talking about this a while, particularly during January when the injuries were starting to stack up in their defence. The Joe Gomez injury, we were told at the start of January, would be over fairly soon. He's coming back imminently. They don't really need to add anybody because that's not how they do their business. And, they've sent out a right back. Sure, what's the big deal? He didn't really want to be there anyway. But in retrospect, and at the time, the case that we were making was, break your rules. This is one of the few opportunities you're ever going to have to cement your position at the top of the table. Sign a right back. Whoever that right back is, all they need to do is to be good enough to play the next 5 or 6 games to get you through this sticky period. And they didn't do that. And lo and behold, suddenly they don't have Milner in midfield because Milner's playing right back. And they don't have that strength and depth. They're left with Adam Lallana playing, who, whether or not that one bit of trickery justifies his existence for the entire 69 minutes that he played last night, I'm not sure. But break your rules if you have to try and win a league.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair about the right back, that it probably didn't make sense to let Klein go because obviously he wants to play and no one wants to keep an unhappy player. And we can debate whether there's a moral issue whether there's a moral issue of making someone work somewhere they don't want to, whatever job they do. I would suggest that. But they should probably have tried to keep Klein because he'd be playing right now. The centre-back thing is a bit more difficult because Gomez is injured and Lovren's injured at the same time. You should probably expect that's not going to be the case. It's probably fair to assume that that's not going to be the case. And that isn't why they didn't win last night, and it's not why they didn't win against Leicester. The problem, I think, last night, and the problem against Leicester was the attacking, really. And again, they missed Trent Alexander-Arnold because they don't have that flair and that guile and that wit in midfield. They rely a lot on their fullbacks to give them some width, which means that they've got overloads because their wide players then come inside. Mane and Salah can sort of attack that space between fullbacks and centre-backs because someone else is supplying the width and someone else is putting the ball in the box. And they didn't really have that yesterday. And what I would say is you don't really want to be looking like this at the beginning of February. These are the kind of performances you might expect at the end of March, at the beginning of April. But to be performing like this at this point of the season is not really what you need because it shows that the nerves are going to get on top. And as it gets closer and closer, as we get closer and closer to the end of the season, the players might start to wonder whether they can actually rely on themselves to get the job done because they don't have that resource of having done it before, which Manchester City do. Most of those players, they all won the title last season. Quite a lot of them have won it at least once before, and some of them have won it twice before. So they know that they can rely on themselves to find a way of getting the job done. And in the end, they're just better. And it is unusual for a team that doesn't have the best players and the best team to win the league. And that's, as you mentioned, that's what I've been saying here all season. It just seems very hard for me to see a way that a team can take the title away from Manchester City because they have so many of the best players in the league and a format that works. And if they can keep it sensible, then it's quite hard to see them not winning it from here.
There is a factor as well, of course, with the last couple of games that set pieces have cost them points directly. And I mean, they probably should have conceded a second one from Declan Rice as well last night. It is a little bit odd that a team who have the two central cogs of their set-piece defending, I'm making an assumption here that the two central cogs are Alisson and Virgil van Dijk, that they've been a consistent part of that whoever is the other professional footballer who is in that setup should be fairly adequate at defending set pieces, but it seems that once the personnel drops out, their level at defending set pieces drops. Is that a fair comment?
I'm sure it's a fair comment for any team. If you don't have your first choice back five, you're going to find it harder to defend all the way in any circumstance. But I think last night was a little bit different because the goal, for example, that didn't come from a ball in the box. So if you're used to defending the box in a particular way and the crosses come in, then people should know who's doing what. But what we saw yesterday was the value of practicing set pieces, and we've seen that quite a bit. We've seen that quite a bit this season, actually. where teams are being a little bit more creative with the way they're taking corners and free kicks. And in the first half in particular, every time West Ham got a free kick, they looked like they planned what they were going to do for that instance. And that immediately becomes harder to defend than a ball put into the box, whether it's a good ball or not. And so you're then going to be asked to defend a second ball, not a first ball. And you're not just going to be there to punch it clear or to head it clear. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it was on Virgil van Dijk and Alisson that, because the goal actually came because was it Naby Keita switched off. And that was just really good planning from West Ham. And when teams plan like that and they execute it properly, it's really, really hard to defend.
Yeah, it's a good finish as well. I want to play you this. It's Pat Nevin speaking on the show last night. Here he is talking about Chelsea suddenly being a difficult tie for City next weekend. Have a look.
Do you feel it's fairly certain that City will win? Chelsea suit them nicely, do they?
I think they're the dream team for City to play against.
Right.
Chelsea in many ways, because you're going to play Manchester City at their own game. Man City are better at it. So, it's not absolutely beyond the bounds of possibility. But I mean, I would be surprised. What I would almost suspect is a high scoring game, with probably both sides scoring, because that's just the way Sarri is. He will open it out against Manchester City, and it will be an interesting game that way, but it will be mayhem. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm sort of open enough to enjoy the skills of any player that's out there, and there should be a lot of good players playing out there as well, who will be given a bit of space because it'll be quite an open game. So, no, I mean, but having said that, Mark Lawrence, and I think the call City won't get beat till now in the end of the season, I don't know how big a call that is. A bigger call would be they'll win every game between now and the end of the season.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's going to happen, but I will not be even slightly surprised if that does happen.
Yeah, I should obviously have said that it won't be a difficult tie for City. I can kind of see a lot of people ready to make the call that City have recovered from their blip, and that pending some disaster in the Champions League, that it's not that difficult to see them winning every game from this point forward.
I think it's quite difficult to see that because it just doesn't really happen very often. I think the longest winning run at the end of the season is when Arsenal won 13 straight at the end of 01-02, and that is unusual. Teams don't usually do that. City might be able to do that, but they're still in the League Cup, they're still in the FA Cup, and actually they're really only probably one difficult game away from winning the FA Cup. They're still in Europe, so something will probably slip somewhere, but it may not be in the league. So it's possible that they win every game, but I'd be fairly surprised if that happened, because that kind of thing doesn't happen very often. But I would expect them to take care of Chelsea. I'm not sure that Chelsea will necessarily play an open game against them. I think what they'll try and do is they'll try and keep the ball as much as they can when they have it, look to draw City in, and then try and break in numbers, because they've got to score a goal, and they'll then try and get Hazard and Higuain into the game. But I definitely wouldn't expect them to engage City in an open game, because they'll get whacked if they do.
What did they do when they beat them the month before last? It felt fairly open. Like, the details are kind of a bit sketchy at the moment. There was like a lot of cross-field passing. Like, David Luiz was obviously unbelievable that day against Manchester City, but it did seem it was fairly open.
No, I think Chelsea defended quite deep in numbers and waited for the opportunity. I think they got a bit lucky that day. If I remember correctly, Aguero was injured and Guardiola didn't pick Jesus, just left him on the bench, and City played without a centre-forward. And they played in such a way, they reminded me of an Alex Ferguson line after United had been beaten by Celtic. And he said something along the lines of, they were enjoying playing so much that they forgot they were in a match. And that was basically how City played. They played like they assumed a goal would be along eventually. They didn't actually make a lot of chances. Sterling missed a good one. But then other than that, they passed the ball very nicely. They didn't create a lot. And then Chelsea did them on the break just before half-time. And then they did them on the break again a bit later on. So no, I don't really think that was a particularly open game. I think it looked open when City were attacking, because they played pretty well, but they just forgot that edge that you need to win games against decent teams. And I would imagine that Chelsea have beaten City playing one way this season. I don't think they're going to try and alter that too substantially, because they don't really have the players to. They're not going to outplay them in midfield. And if you're not going to outplay a team in midfield, then you're pretty much left soaking up the pressure and looking to counter quickly. And that's pretty much Chelsea's only route to beat City.
But like we can look at what's happened over the last couple of weeks as a little bit of self-inflicted wounds from a Liverpool perspective, but ultimately, have Manchester City started this themselves in terms of beating Liverpool? Was this actually the seed of doubt that was sown from their exact title challengers?
Liverpool played pretty well that day. And actually, they probably consider themselves unfortunate to have got beaten. On another day, they could have taken the lead in that game. So Liverpool actually, I would say they rose to that game, and that was a really good sign the way that Liverpool played in that match. It's actually just the last few games where they've been showing a bit of tension, not against games like City, where I guess the players probably feel that in the head-to-heads they quite fancy themselves against City. It's when things don't go well from the beginning of the game and the players start to get nervous and the crowd starts to get nervous. So even the Palace game, they did brilliantly to find the way to win that, but you won't be able to find the way to win every game where you concede 3 times at home. And similarly against Leicester, they got the early goal, but then Leicester started to come into the game and Liverpool started to get nervous. And of course, it's completely understandable. Why wouldn't they get nervous? They've not won the league for 29 years. They're looking to find a way to win the league. That is nerve-wracking for the players. There's a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. They know how important it is to the supporters. And more than that, they know how important it is to their own careers. They want to win the league. And it's difficult to win the league. And so it's possible that this is just a run of bad form that's coincided with a run of injuries, which is what happened to City when they lost those 3 games around Christmas. But with Liverpool, because they don't have the track record of having done it, because they don't have as many options and as many excellent players, you start to wonder if it's in fact something else. And we'll start to find out over the next few weeks. But they need to find a solution and really quickly, because if not, City will be out of sight.
Yeah, okay. One last question for you about the ongoing Ole Gunnar Solskjaer situation. As time keeps going, as the results keep being as good as they are, as so many players keep talking about the change in atmosphere, environment and their happiness, as contracts begin to get signed, it's starting to look not quite inevitable that he's getting the job, but like far more likely than not that he will be the manager next season.
I think what happens in the next month or so will probably tell us. If United get beat by Paris Saint-Germain and start to lose ground in the league with some difficult games, then obviously it's less likely that he might get the job. But if they carry on playing as they're playing, then they've got a much better chance. I suppose what we've seen in the last few weeks, obviously he's still getting points, but you could start asking some questions. Why wasn't he able to affect the flow of the game against Leicester? Would be one question you might ask. And you might look at it the other way and say, well, you've watched loads of those games under Alex Ferguson, where United looked to not play all that well and still produce the one moment of definitive quality in the game and come away with the win. So you could look at it that way, or you could say he ought really to have found a way of altering the flow. Or I guess you could look at it a third way and say, well, actually, United just don't have the players to dominate a decent team in midfield. So whoever the manager is will need to buy 1, maybe 2 players to put them in a position where they're able to do that. But I agree, it is looking like he might get the job. And the way that it's working out at Paris Saint-Germain also seems to be playing into his hands, where they won't have Neymar. Looks like they're not going to have Verratti either. And then they all of a sudden become quite a beatable team. And the home leg first also probably works for Solskjaer, where United have an opportunity to establish themselves in the tie rather than play at home and they're already, say, 2-0 down or 3-1 down, which they could be. But they've got to find a way. They've got to try and find a way to beat Chelsea in the Cup. They've got to try and beat Liverpool at home. And it seems unlikely that they're going to construct a winning run that encompasses all of those games. But if they come out of February and they're still in Europe and still in with a run of the top 4, then, yeah, it will be very difficult to see anyone else getting the job.
Daniel, great stuff this morning. Thanks a million. Cheers.
I'll see you again.
Daniel Harris giving us some thoughts there on the Liverpool situation, the Chelsea-Man City game, and, of course, the more likely than not now situation at United.